welcome to another exciting episode of the Team Lead Talks podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Becker, out of Alexandria, Virginia. On this episode, my buddy, we recently met in Nashville down at the Coaching Inc. in-person event that Tom Kroll had put on, Darrin Bentley. Darrin is a marketing strategist, a podcasting coach, a personal brand advisor, helping coaches and founders build authority and attract pre-sold buyers with highly optimized client-winning podcasts. Welcome to the show, Darrin. Excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, man. So you do a lot around marketing and the public eye. Let's start slow, Darrin, if you can. Like, how did you get into this? Where did you find your footing here doing what you do today?
Good question, man. For me, I spent 25 years on Wall Street, and I've always had kind of an entrepreneurial bug. I've always done little side hustles and things like that. But I got to a point where, my company was like outsourcing departments, and they gave me a really good opportunity, but I would have had to do a lot of traveling to India. I don't like traveling very much. Okay. So I was like, you know what? This is a good opportunity for me to kind of go out on my own and figure it out. I didn't know what it was that I wanted to do, but I do like writing. Copywriting was one of the areas that I was especially, just started studying some of the great copywriters and learning. And then I just got into internet marketing, online marketing, and in particular, high ticket coaching. That was an area that I saw just a lot of explosive growth in the folks that I was following at the time, and using podcasting as kind of a marketing weapon for me just made a lot of sense. And that's kind of how I got started.
Okay. And I know we connected in Coaching Inc. How did you, and what's your background and friendship with Tom? How did you guys connect there?
So Tom and I actually met about maybe 14, 15 years ago.
Wow.
We met in a high-level mastermind, and we were, at the time he was just getting started with coaching, doing like real estate coaching at the time.
Yeah.
And I just we connected, we hit it off immediately. We were fast friends, and we would be talking, and he would be like, oh, I'm trying to get more clients, and I'm doing my content like this or that.
Yeah.
I'd be like, you know what? You want to say it like this. You want to package it this way. You want to frame it that way. You want to use this angle. And, every time that he would, follow my advice, not to say every time, but he'd follow my advice, he'd get really good results, and he would tell me oh man, that worked great. And then one day he just said, hey, you know what? We talk so much, let's just, you want to build this thing together?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. I said, let's do it, and we started building the company, Wholesaling Inc. at the time.
Right.
And the first year that we started working together, we 10x'd our revenue. And then from there, it just went up, so yeah. And then we ultimately exited that company.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can attest, I'll say the majority of the time what you told him worked. I was a client of Wholesaling Inc. myself back in 2017 or 2018, somewhere around there. I'm bad with dates, but got into Tom's world that way as well. So very cool. So just to clarify, Darrin, you start out in Wall Street. There was a chance to exit and kind of do your own thing. So you got into the online marketing world. Did you at that point have your own podcast, and were you getting feedback and seeing the results of success from your podcast, and then you started helping others? Or where was the next move there?
Right. Kind of how did I really get into the podcasting side of it? So
right.
I did start my own podcast quite a while ago, and it was an interview type show. I just saw, for anyone thinking about getting into podcasting, the way that I see it, it's just a no-brainer, right? For so many different reasons, whether it be, connecting with folks, building and establishing relationships, partners, affiliates, clients, all those things, and also honing in your own talking points, right?
Right.
But when I started the podcast, I was like, okay, I was a little naive, right? And I guess being naive in this case worked in my favor, because I wanted to do this really great show, and I wanted to have great people on. It was like, oh man, you don't have any listeners. Nobody's gonna, these people up here, people like Gary Vaynerchuk, Robert Kiyosaki, Jack Canfield, you name it, Darren Hardy, all these, big marketers and authors and speakers and just people who are doing a lot in the world. And I was able to convince them to give me their time. So that's what I did. I would leverage the name of someone else to kind of build and go to the next higher rung. And I was able to establish some really amazing relationships. In fact, some relationships where I've done partnerships with these folks. I have friends to this day that I made from that podcast that I did over a decade ago. That's
Wow.
just really testament to the power of podcasting, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
So, Darrin, kind of starting from ground zero for someone listening right now that's thinking about getting into podcasting, you have so much experience and little nuances of trial, error, you know what works. What's your number one thing when someone's like, I'm thinking about starting a podcast, advice that you can share with them about getting started?
Well, I would say you want to know what is your ultimate goal with a podcast. Why do you want to start a podcast?
Okay. Can you
You
give
know,
us some examples of what some ultimate goals would be for some people? Maybe sticking in the real estate world.
well, in the real estate world, like again, I have so much experience with like coaches and consultants because I work with quite a few of them, some of the larger name influencers and experts in our space. Everyone has a different objective. Some people really want a podcast just so they can establish partnerships, build relationships, connect with other folks, like higher level folks, and have a conversation that way. Other people have products, programs, services that they might want to sell. So it really depends on what it is that your objective is with the podcast, but you definitely want to think, you want to have an idea of why you want to start a podcast. The podcast it's a great marketing channel, of course, right? It allows you to build a very deep and intimate relationship with your prospects, but it's also not a miracle worker either, right? Like you have to work it the right way to make it work.
Yeah.
So unless you really know what your goals and objectives are with a podcast, it's going to be really difficult because a lot of people will hear a podcast and they'll say, I want to start a podcast like his or hers. And, like they don't really have any plan in place. They don't really know what they want to do at the time. I prefer to, like work with folks who like kind of have an idea of what that is, or even, I can help them flesh that out, but at least you want to have a base idea of why you're doing it.
Okay. So you need a pretty straightforward and logical why to start a podcast. And then once that's established, like what are the next steps to actually going out and getting people? It sounded like you had some really early success getting some really big names in the industry on yours. But a lot of people are asking her now, like, how in the world did you do that? How do you get your first guest? What do you do to kind of get the momentum going?
Yeah. So the thing coming back to guest, if your objective is to get like connect with high level folks who might not normally give you the time of day, the great thing about a podcast is, it doesn't matter if you have 5 listeners or 50,000 listeners, you have a platform. So now this gives you the ability to be able to connect with people. But the thing is, when you're thinking about swinging for the fences and, you're wanting to talk with Tony Robbins, obviously these people are going to vet you and they want to make sure that like if they're going to waste their time or spend their time with you, that you're going to at least have some kind of a listener base. For me, what I did was I started with, I don't ever like to look at anyone or call them like a lower level type of influencer, but let's just think micro type influencers, people with maybe a little bit bigger than a small audience. And then you just like kind of work your way up the rungs. And that's exactly what I did. Like one of my first interviews was with a woman named Julie Ainer Clark, who was the founder of Baby Einstein, which was ultimately sold to Disney Company. And for me, that was a very important interview because my oldest daughter, we used her product and that was an integral part of like my, like the first year to 18 months of my child's upbringing.
Right.
So I heard it all the time. I believed in the product. And so that was a very important one for me. Now, if you look at her, she's not necessarily like this high level influencer. However, when you have her and you have a couple of other folks like, that are kind of similar in terms of their reach and you're pitching to get on other people, like get other like higher name people or bigger name people on your show, they see that like, oh, wow, this person's serious. He spoke with this person. He's had this person as a guest. And you just like kind of move up the chain pretty much.
Yeah. But the key here, if I may, is starting, building momentum and kind of never stopping, right, Darrin? Like that's how you get to that. Obviously, you can't start at the top unless you get super lucky and you might know a Tony Robbins-esque kind of person and it catches on. But how important is like starting that momentum and then not giving up or getting, thrown off a little bit if it doesn't kick off or pick up as quickly as you envision it?
Yeah. And that's a great question because I think a lot of people go into podcasting with very unrealistic expectations. expectations. You have to realize, like any other marketing channel, right? Podcasting is a long play. So you should go into it with the mindset that, if I don't make a penny from my podcast, for the next 2 years, I'm okay with that. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be the case, maybe for some people, but if you have a plan, if you have a strategy, if you know what your goal is and you actually execute correctly, you could, obviously make money much, much faster than that, like quite a few folks do. So
Right.
it really comes down to going in, with the right expectations and not thinking like this is going to make me a fortune. I think too many people think about podcasting as the thing, like I'm going to start a podcast and the podcast is going to make me the money. It
Right.
doesn't work that way. You want to use it as a tool, really.
Yeah. Kind of the monetization of a podcast, in my opinion, is like the secondary, tertiary thing that happens if you're doing it for the right reason and you're starting and continuing that momentum. That kind of just happens naturally, right? Like people will just start listening to it, then you start making money, and it's kind of like the gravy on top of all the relationships you're building. Or how important is a podcast, Darrin, in your opinion, for like authority building? If you're a coach out there, where does that come into play?
That's a big part of it. And, like a lot of people are always thinking like, how do I get more credibility? How do I establish myself as an authority?
Right.
Podcast, again, when done right, is really a very effective tool in that way. But again, it really just comes down to, doing it the right way, executing correctly, having a compelling premise, something that's going to differentiate you from other podcasts.
Right.
I think too many people, as I said a minute ago, they have a podcast, they hear a show that they like, and they say, I'm going to do a podcast just like that guy. But the problem is, what's going to differentiate your show from 8 million other shows, like in the real estate space, for example? All these people that have a podcast, but what makes their show different? And that's where, having some kind of a compelling premise comes into play. So the folks that I work with, that's a big place that we focus on. And it's not just coming, like part of that premise is really identifying with supreme clarity who like your perfect listener is.
Yeah,
That's
that
a
makes
really big part, because if you don't know who you're talking to, you're not going to know what to say, right?
yeah.
Like that's what it comes down to.
No, well said. And I think talk to me about like, okay, so we're starting a podcast, you're building momentum, you're getting guests to obtain customers or acquire customers, let's say if you're in a coaching program, and also to be kind of seen as an authoritative figure. But then at some point, Darrin, how important is it to be seen that way to get on other people's podcasts as well? Does that help making that connection for say like having someone on mine and then me going on somebody else's?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, having a podcast, it enables you, like you got to realize that the folks that have a podcast are getting pitched every single day, all day, multiple times a day.
Yeah.
So, like unless you really know how to come up with an effective pitch to get yourself on other people's shows, some people just use agencies, and I'm not against that. That's fine too. But unless you really know how to get yourself booked, having a podcast really opens the door to a lot of folks, because it's like, hey, you know what? You have this great show. I have this great show over here. Let's, would you like to be on my show and I could come on your show?
Yeah.
So you're cross-pollinating, reaching into other people's audiences. And, again, not only are you able to do those podcast swaps, but now, the more that you get to like meet people and build those relationships, and you do a fantastic job of this, man. You're really seeing things like where you're having a conversation. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that you did that. I do something similar over here. And now like there's maybe some synergy. And I see this stuff. This happens all the time,
Yeah. Yeah, the podcast swap, if you will, is an incredible tool to use where you form those partnerships. And then, yeah, just through the conversation from the episode itself, you're like, hey, let's collaborate. And then it kind of turns into what you had mentioned earlier, where it turns into a friendship or a partnership or an even bigger collaboration to do other stuff above and beyond the podcast itself, which is really cool. I'm starting to see this from talking to you and learning a lot from you, from your experience here.
Well, you do a really good job, though, man. I'm not blowing smoke. I mean, like, I remember when we first connected in the conversation that we had, I was like, all right, man, this dude gets it, like you really are using it as like a great leverage piece to really like connect with people and serve them, right? Like, you know, that's the one thing, you know, just from some folks that I've seen on your podcast too. I mean, like, you know, you definitely like got that servant's heart. And I think that's when you go into these relationships, like with, you know, you don't have an agenda necessarily, like you're just
Yeah.
looking to like have a really good conversation, offer some value. Great things happen. Great
Yeah.
things come in it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're building rapport for the podcast, but then you're kind of building this friendship too out of
Hmm.
that. So it's very cool, very powerful, I think.
Yeah.
Which is also like you and I really enjoyed our pre-episode conversation. Looking forward to, are you going down to Orlando next week as well so we can
Yes, I
catch up
will
in
be there.
person?
I will
Okay.
be there. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a great time.
Yeah, me too. So I will be there as well. But Darrin, talk to me about how you help people. If someone wants to learn more about, your coaching program to help people start operate, like where do you come in? Do you come in at the very start? If I have a podcast or my friend has a podcast that they've been doing for a year or two, do you kind of work with anyone with the podcast? What's the criteria to, start to work together, or at least to chat with you to see if it might be a good fit for somebody?
Yeah. So for me, you know, I don't have like a quote unquote coaching program. I don't work that way. I really work with people more on a one-on-one basis. We go
Gotcha.
very
Okay.
deep and very wide. Typically, you know, I'm working with folks who have some kind of an offer in place already, and the offer is proven. It's actually generating revenue, preferably a minimum of 10K per month in terms of revenue wise. But, you know, I work with folks all over the gamut, but the reason why I kind of use that 10K number as a floor is because we know that you have an offer that's proven, you're getting consistent high ticket clients every month, and a podcast obviously is going to make sense. The folks, I don't typically work with hobbyists, although I do advise some of those folks, and I'm happy to.
Yeah.
But, you know, my sweet spot is really somebody who is, you know, a coach, a consultant, an expert, an influencer who has some kind of product, program, or service, and they want to, you know, just scale that. And they want to use the podcast as either a front end lead funnel, right? Or they want to just build an audience, you know, build those relationships, establish authority, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Again, it really depends on what their objectives are. And you could do all of those things at the same time as well.
Very cool. Yeah. So, Darrin, if someone wants to reach out to you and find you to have this conversation about, whether they'd be a good fit for you and vice versa to work together, how does somebody contact you? Where do they find you?
I'd say Facebook is probably the best place. Just shoot me a DM. And, you know, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And, you know, like if we do have a conversation and it might not be a good fit, I can definitely steer you in the right direction of someone that might be able to help you.
Cool.
So just ping me on Facebook, just shoot me a DM. That's probably the best place to get a hold of me.
Awesome. We'll also include your contact information in the description. So if you're listening to on YouTube, just look down and click on Darrin's profile. Darrin, one last question. I know you've already shared so much about the podcast world and how different people can use it and grow it and scale it. But is there a resource or maybe a book, preferably a book, because I'm trying to fill my bookcase behind me, that you can share that if anyone listening can pick up on, it could better their life, their community, or their business?
Okay. I'd say since we're on the conversation of podcasting, there's a book. It's been out for a while. I'd say there's still a lot of good information in it. It's called Big Podcast. I believe that's the name, by David Hooper. And, you know, I mean, he's a really smart dude. I think the book is really good. There's a lot of, you know, sound foundational information in that book for sure. Some of it, you know, has like maybe changed a little bit, you know, with the times and everything. But I think for anyone that is really thinking about a podcast, if they either have one and they're, you know, trying to improve it or to grow it, to scale it, that's a really good starting place. It's a really thick book. I don't remember how many pages, but there's a lot of great information in that book.
Very cool. I appreciate you sharing that with us. I actually just ordered it on Amazon, so I will
Okay.
get that in a couple of days.
Nice. Let me know how you make out with that book, man. I'm curious to hear
Yeah,
your thoughts on it.
I will, man. Darrin, thank you so much for your time today and sharing everything that you've learned so far around the podcast topic. I had a blast talking to you, and I'm sure we'll more than likely continue this conversation in person down in Orlando soon, but appreciate your time and thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me, man. I enjoyed our time as well, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you in Orlando.
Yes, sir. All right, take
Awesome.
care.
Thanks, man.